Welcome to A World Gone Mad, where I am your host, Christian McMillan. Today I am joined by Ilan of Inside Fighting. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on, man.
So, one of my favorite things I saw you do a video on recently was the history of the Arditi.
Of the what?
The Arditi, the
Oh
Italian
yeah, that was
trench
sick.
knife
That was
fighters.
sick. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my friend brought that up for me because he knows I like, especially knife fighting systems. I've been doing knife fighting most of my life, or knife fighting martial arts most of my life, and that was a shocker because you don't have many examples that you can look at where people are just destroying people with guns just by carrying knives in their mouth and running into the trenches and then stabbing people. It's crazy how effective knives can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like it's across most of your videos, you refer to pressure testing. And I
Mhm.
was thinking during that video, nothing is more pressure tested than hardened soldiers picked from other battalions to create a specific battalion of trench warfarist.
Well, I mean, they even had people die in training, which is crazy. That's how
Wow.
serious they were. So if you could survive the training, they knew, and they had I believe, a 30% mortality rate every time they went out. So one out of three of them would die just from going into the trenches. And the stuff with the artillery is crazy. They had to train to be able to handle the explosive sound and like concussive force of being near artillery because they would just run in and the artillery would give them cover. So uh, just really interesting to see how different militaries around the world develop in different ways based on their needs and necessities of the time. I would have never thought that there was in modern day warfare or relatively modern day warfare. We're not talking about thousands of years ago. We're talking about after the advent of artillery, guns, everything, that there would be a unit like that.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, it was really cool, really fascinating. And that's where it's one of those sweet little Easter eggs if you were to dive into World War One. I had never heard anything like it or about it before in my life.
yeah, me neither until my buddy brought it up. It's cool. Some people know a lot of stuff that you just have no idea about until you're presented with it. And then you're like, man, I just saw something super cool on armor. It was this French armor. I don't remember from what year, and it was totally malleable. Uh, the development of it pretty much made them invincible for the time period they were wearing it. And it has so many folds and scales that you can move your body and articulate in any way, but there's no openings to get cut through it. So it's pretty cool also.
Almost like scales, as if you're a protected animal, it sounds
Hmm.
like. Do you know
Yeah.
what it was made of?
Looked like solid steel. I don't know. It was like a heavy duty steel armor. It looked like the old knight armor, but way more fitted and way more malleable. Like even that they showed the foot articulation. They had like all these little overlapping layers on the foot so you can fully articulate your foot.
Cool. That's very neat.
Yeah.
Have you
That
seen anything historically comparable at all to the RDD before?
No, I haven't personally. I know people had recommended I look at some other military units. I haven't looked at them yet. I did look at, Native Americans, their knife fighting because they relied heavily on uh bladed weapons and different tools to fight their wars initially. There's some cool stuff there, but it's definitely not as intense in my view as what we saw in terms of being like a suicidal unit to just
Yeah.
run in. I haven't found that yet, but in terms of technique and knife fighting technique, there's a lot of militaries around the world that have historically very cool knife fighting units and sword fighting units and that kind of stuff.
Neat. Neat. It something that comes to mind is I watched your video recently on HEMA. It's that
Yeah.
historical European martial arts.
Hmm.
And it kind of just the diagrams felt somewhat comparable to the ones in the RDD video where they're old and it's almost like something. If I remember correctly in the RDD video, you had mentioned that they got lots of their skills from analyzing European historical text,
Yeah,
much like they would in.
The Arditi martial art is in many ways like a HEMA, right? It is
Okay.
like because they took it from manuscripts. That's where they got their style from. Italian manuscripts of fencing and all that kind of stuff, and they adapted it, they tested it, and they put it into actual application. The big shocker for me with HEMA, because I had heard about HEMA, I'd seen it growing up in different areas, and I was like, oh, those guys are just cosplaying. Those guys are putting
Yeah.
on armor and just like hitting themselves with stuff. And I thought it was not a real martial art until I deep dove into it. And I'm like, no, these guys are legitimate. And it was kind of, there's this weird thing. Like Filipino martial arts was always cool to me. I grew up doing Filipino martial arts. But Filipino martial arts, in many ways, is a weapon based historical system based on the needs of the people at the time and their environment, which is exactly what HEMA is. But for some reason, I respected Filipino martial arts and not HEMA. And the reality is that HEMA guys are constantly fighting and testing, and they have the people who look at the manuscripts, look at the information in the documents, analyze it, and see if it's adaptable. And then you have a lot of people who go out and really test, 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 test. And there's so many fragmentations of it into different directions that it's a very cool system, actually.
Yeah, some of it was also just brutal. That clip of the knockout with the shield
Yeah.
that
Oh,
you
on
put
top of
up.
the guy hitting him
Yeah.
down in the head. I don't even know how people don't die from that. Like, that's
Yeah.
crazy to me. That guy had a concussion for sure. And they have it's the only martial art where I've seen that they get like 30 people on each side, dress up or do whatever they're going to do. And there was two segments. I can't remember what the other thing is called. There was HEMA, and then there was another thing. The thing in armor had a different name. A lot of HEMA guys are like, no, we don't wear armor. I kind of got ragged on after that for not drawing the differentiation.
Okay.
But to me, it's all historical European martial arts. If you're wearing armor, it's still a historical European martial art. It still falls under that umbrella in my mind, but I guess to people who practice it, they make that distinction. But they'll literally get like 20 people and just have a full-on fight on each side, like a mass attack. And like people are sneaking up behind each other, cracking each other with hammers and shields in the head with full force armor, and like it's craziness. I would not personally want to be in a mashup like that, just because I feel like you could easily get a concussion.
Yeah, it looks like it'd feel like getting hit by a car comes to mind.
Mm-hmm. I don't care how well protected you are. Like there's still concussive force, and I felt it even when I do Filipino martial arts and I spar full force. One of the only type of things I like to wear. I'm always a big fan of protecting your head, so I don't mind getting hit in the body with a stick. I actually trash a lot of. I don't trash. I'm not a fan of wekaf, which is a form of stick fighting where you have kind of like the kendo outfit. You have like an armor on that's like a padded cloth thing that comes over your body, almost like a skirt level thing. And you're
Okay.
very, very protected. You have elbow pads, you have big, big, big hand protectors. If I'm in a stick fight, I like to just put on a helmet. I don't even like to protect my hands because like my hands can recover from getting hit. My body can recover from getting hit, even if I break a bone, but my head is cumulative damage. What you find is with the helmet, which is very similar, an Eskrima helmet, Kali helmet, is very similar to a kendo helmet. It's just like fenced in and it comes over, it protects your neck, which is important too. Comes to here, it kind of flops down and then behind. But you still feel the concussive force sometimes when you're getting hit with the stick. It's very jarring. People don't realize until they do it. If you're getting hit by someone who knows how to hit hard with a stick,
Mm-hmm.
it still messes you up a little bit sometimes, even with the helmet on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, much like in boxing or anything, even if you got that big rubber strap on, it still sucks to be really rattled.
I don't think the headgears in boxing even make a difference, to be honest. I think they've done studies and they found that the rate of concussion was higher in people who had the headgears on than people who didn't.
Really?
Yeah, and same thing with if you look at gloves, padded gloves versus not wearing gloves, the rate of injury of actual traumatic brain injury was higher in wearing padded gloves because it doesn't stop the movement of your head whipping back and forth.
Right.
It protects your hands, but I think the impact on your face is not necessarily what's relevant. You'll get more superficial damage, bare knuckle. You'll
Mm-hmm.
get cuts. You'll get lacerations. You might even have some more bone fragmentation or whatever is happening there. But in terms of concussive damage to your brain, that's on the movement of your head and neck. So I think it was higher in people who wore padded gloves because they were able to absorb more superficial damage because it just wasn't happening as much.
Right. Do you think the weight of the gloves added to your punch would also accumulate
It's
effect
a
of that?
Maybe it's a small amount, and I think it would slow you down a little. I don't know if that's like I don't think people hit measurably harder with the glove because of the weight. It's
Okay.
possible. Um, I think it's just because they can take more.
Okay.
I think you get cut. You look at BKFC; those fights are over very quick. Have you seen BKFC? Bare knuckle
I
fighting championships.
I have very little, a handful of times.
So it's like a newer bare knuckle kind of boxing match, and you look at it compared to boxing, regular boxing with gloves. The
Hmm.
fights end way faster. They're way more aggressive because with bare knuckle, you can't take as much. And I think that's part of what happened in the UFC, why you don't see MMA guys having the same kind of traumatic brain injury that you find in boxing. Not to say that they don't have brain injuries. Some of those guys definitely have CTE, but I
Oh
don't think
yeah.
it's at the same rate because when you get hit in the face with an MMA glove and you get knocked down, the fight continues on the ground and it ends. You're not getting stood up for an 8 count.
Yeah, that was
And
exactly what I had heard, that the counting people in and then letting them continue to fight is the big difference between boxing and MMA in terms of CTE.
yeah, I mean, you have guys who are clearly unconscious for a moment.
Yeah.
Tyson Fury, I've seen that guy literally die on the canvas and get up and keep fighting. I mean, like, and
Yes.
you have to realize that once you have some kind of traumatic injury to your brain, subsequent injuries, even for months after, there was a boxer, a female who died in Montreal. She had a concussion, and then she fought 3 months later. She didn't even get hit that hard, and she died of brain swelling. And the doctors concluded that it was a due to recurrent damage post concussion. Um, your brain needs a lot of time to recover when you get hurt. And you see it with a lot of fighters that they just never get their button back. You know what I mean? You always worry about it when one of your favorite fighters like Volkanovski took 2 hard KOs. He clearly has eaten hard punches in the past. After the head kick, he came back really fast to fight Topuria. I don't know if you watch UFC, but he got KO'd because I don't know. Look, he what might have gotten KO'd by that shot no matter what, but definitely fought, I think, within 2 months of getting KO'd by a hard head kick on a fight that he took short notice that fight. I mean, the
Yeah,
whole series of things, there's just, you don't like seeing fighters go through that because you know that it has a permanent effect on their brains.
absolutely. Absolutely. Some people I feel like you even watch, like in the earlier days when I was newer to it, Chuck Liddell, and it seemed like one time he got rocked on the chin, and then afterwards you watch the Iceman, get
Not the
crumpled.
same.
Yeah, it's like there's a genetic limit of how many times you can be concussed.
Hmm. Unless you then take 10 years off and you're at the point where it hasn't really damaged. Andre Arlovsky at one point, everyone was worried about his chin. And then he took quite a bit of time off and then came back and he looked like he was having a second run and actually could eat a lot of damage. Um, but Chuck Liddell, if you listen to his speech after those knockouts and in subsequent
Yes.
years, he's changed as an individual. His motor function is much slower. You saw it
Y-
in the Tito Ortiz fight that should have never happened.
yes. No, that was exactly, it looked like it should have never happened,
Mhm.
was my perception. I remember watching that rematch and yeah, it looked wrong. Comes
Yeah,
to
look
mind
wrong.
as a word. Yeah. No,
Uh,
and there is even some excerpts of interviews I've seen before where you could tell he, checks out for a moment mid conversation and he doesn't know who he's talking to or what he's saying, Chuck Liddell.
yeah.
And
Look,
it's scary.
I haven't been hit nearly as much as these pro fighters, but I
Yes.
used to spar very hard. I've taken shots to the head. I get weird migraines. I get days where, like, sometimes I slur a little bit. Uh,
Hmm.
they've done studies on amateurs' brains, like after just a few fights, and they've shown brain changes in just a few fights. It does. We're not designed to just punch each other in the head repeatedly. It's why I'm a huge advocate now in your martial art. I believe you have to spar, but spar in a way where you're not taking head trauma. That's not going to benefit you. Even if
Hmm.
you want to be a pro fighter, that's not going to benefit you. But if you're training for self defense, it's really not going to benefit you. It's going to make you slower on the street where you're going to need it. It's going to reduce your ability to actually absorb impact. Make your body as strong as possible. Spar with light contact to the head, hard contact to the body.
Hmm.
Drill, drill, drill. You definitely do need to spar, but there's ways to spar hard, even where you're not taking head trauma. I won't advocate it for anyone at this point in my life.
Yeah, longevity, right, is a huge factor that people should consider.
Hmm. Unless you want to be a world champion fighter and you're willing to sacrifice it, like you're not going to become a champion boxer by not sparring hard in the gym.
Right.
How many of us are trying to become world champion boxers?
Yeah, exactly. More people than make it, I suppose.
A lot more than make it. I mean,
Yeah.
almost everyone makes it.
No, that's exactly it, right? That's what I've seen. So I've known some people who were gifted hockey players, and those people who are almost close enough to make it, sometimes they destroy their body and their health and don't quite get there necessarily.
So, in any professional sport, the degree of which people make make it to a level where it's fame or it's, extreme success,
Mhm.
by definition is like the top 10.
Mhm.
And there's, tens of thousands, if not more people who want to succeed in any given sport. Way
Yeah.
more than tens of thousands. But if you look at elite level athletes, there's still thousands of elite level athletes in any sport at the highest level. So of those thousands and thousands of people, literally 5 are making it to a point where their name is known in your weight category or whatever it is. What people don't realize also is like you can be a superhero in your gym, you can be a superhero on an amateur level, and then even on a pro level, you feel like a superhero. There becomes like I've trained with some really high level guys. I've trained with competitive guys,
Mhm.
then I've trained with high level guys, and then I've trained with guys who are like top of their game, right? And the jump between each one is exponentially greater.
Okay.
So you could be a pro MMA fighter. And we just saw this with Sean Strickland fighting the Navy SEAL. He just beat up a Navy SEAL. That Navy SEAL was
Yes.
still a black belt in jiu-jitsu. This is what no one's talking about. That Navy SEAL was a black belt in jiu-jitsu who is also an MMA fighter, a pro MMA fighter. So it's a pro MMA fighter who's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, who's a Navy SEAL, who's taking on Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland in that fight, to anyone who watches it, is going 2%. 2%. This guy who he beats 99.9999% of the population easy.
Mhm.
No problem. But there's such a difference when you go from a guy like him to Sean Strickland, who's in my opinion, he's number one because he beat Duplessis.
Yep.
He beat out he didn't win on the judges card, but in my opinion, he won that fight. Let's just say he's top 3 in his division in the world, whatever, on
Yep.
any given day. The jump there is so extreme that people don't realize it's a bigger jump than me, who's been training my whole life, fighting someone who's never trained before. The jump
Right.
is bigger than that. I'm a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I've been doing it most of my life. I'm a good fighter. I've been doing stand-up all my life. It's a much bigger jump than me fighting a nobody, like an out-of-shape, unknown person, versus Sean Strickland fighting a pro MMA fighter. If you look at the guys who are in the UFC and not in the top 10, the jump between getting to the top 10 is massive a lot of the time.
Yes.
And then top 10 to top 3, you're in a different world in a lot of it. Now, like you look at Khabib versus everyone else,
Yep.
Anderson Silva in his prime versus everyone else, George St. Pierre in his prime versus everyone else. There was leagues. You're talking about massive, massive hills to climb to get to that number one spot. And those next 5 people are still, leagues better than everyone below them. So it's just like these crazy exponential jumps in skill in any pro sport. And then people want to ruin their bodies trying to get there. I get it, but it's just, yeah, to me, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, in the upper echelon, right? It's worlds different from people who are even qualifying as pros, right? Like the
Mhm.
best of the best is worlds different than the, broad spectrum of the best, broad category.
In any sport or in any endeavor. You know what I mean? Like shooting guns, right? The
Right.
speed at which someone can draw and shoot who is even military, right? High level military, whatever it may be, compared to a competitive high level shooter.
Mhm.
Like some of these shots from these competitive shooters are crazy fast. I mean, like and maybe some of them are ex-military. I'm sure some of them are, but just the rate, it's all they're doing all day, every day. And it's not only all they're doing all day, every day. It's all they're doing all day, every day, and they have a genetic disposition to be better at it than everyone else to begin with.
Right. That's usually a factor.
But yeah, because then everyone else who's doing it every day would not be in that top 1%. The only difference is like everyone's like, oh, I'm going to train harder than the other guy. No, at the highest level, everyone's training like maniacs.
Mhm.
At the highest level, everyone has the best nutrition. At the highest level, everyone has the best PEDs or whatever they're taking.
Yeah.
There's some kind
Yes.
of genetic freak factor and luck, especially in fighting, that puts you above everyone else.
Yeah, sometimes I think it even could be the right fight at the right point in your career. Because sometimes people get their momentum not even because it was their best fight, but because they fought somebody who was in the right spotlight or on the right trajectory in their career. Like someone who comes to mind is the Diaz brothers, and sometimes people say that Dana White kind of used them to build up other fighters.
Hmm. Or the Diaz brothers, Nick getting his major fame from taking a short notice fight against Connor and beating him.
Yes.
That's that's the biggest money fight that Diaz ever had. That set him off to be. He had his fan base before,
Mhm.
but that was a big, big, big fight for him. That put him in. That was at Connor's height, or in that range of where he was mega popular. Um, yeah, I mean, every fighter uses another, and what you'll see is very interesting. You'll see fighters climb to the top at an elite level, and then have a loss, and then another loss, and another loss, and you're like, did they just like did they, so they had 8 undefeated fights. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
they got to the top, and some of the competition they fought on their way to the top might have been even better in some cases than some of the competition they lose to after the fact. But after that one loss where they got their title fight or they won the title, Chris Weidman is an interesting one. Um, Cody Garbrandt's an interesting one. There's a lot of fighters who get to a certain point, Tony Ferguson, and then they just go on a losing streak. People do attribute it sometimes to head trauma,
Right.
but there's another thing. What's his name? Reyes, who fought John Jones and then just fell off after losing to John Jones. He didn't get knocked out in that fight. He didn't take tremendous, irreversible, life-changing damage in that fight. He just lost his will to fight, maybe because that was his goal. He got to his goal, which was to fight John Jones, and he didn't see a pathway back to it. And the motivation changes. I don't know what it is. Or maybe there's just a trajectory, and when you start losing, your confidence changes, your mentality changes, and it's very hard to get that back. There's so many factors. Uh,
Yeah.
I have a theory about fighting. If you're betting on fighting, always go for the 3-1 underdog, because fighting is always more random at that level than 3-1. There's always a higher statistical chance of a random bad night, random injury, KO, anything happening that is supersedes a 3-1 odd, in my opinion. So, and it's not to say that you won't win. You're not going to win every time.
Right.
But I've been doing it and I'm actually up overall significantly more because sometimes it's 10-1 odds and I'll always take that fight. I really pushed people to bet on Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey back in the day. I was like, the odds are crazy. They don't make sense. She's had how many kickboxing fights? Look at the size of her. She's a pro athlete. The fact that people think, and just reading Ronda Rousey, she was being souped up so much as a good striker. I'm like, this girl's not a striker. Again, the same way that there's worlds of difference between high level people in MMA, there's worlds of difference between a guy like we see now, Pereira in striking,
Oh
and
my
people
God.
who are not professional strikers who have gone
Absolutely.
into MMA as their career. You cannot, as an MMA career, you'll never have striking like Pereira. You just won't.
No.
And Ronda Rousey will never have striking like Holly Holm. So
Yeah.
it's crazy to me that everyone was super rough. She's going to knock out Holly Holm. I'm like, what is everyone? This girl has like 48 pro fights or more. I don't remember what it was. And most, like, she had numerous KOs. And so I knew that Ronda was willing to go stand with her after the knockout of Betch Correa, and like Mike Tyson telling her that she's a great boxer. I don't know. The whole thing was so weird, but that was a good bet.
Hmm.
30-1 odds almost or something like that by KO.
I've seen you lately talk about how incredible it would be for Pereira to fight John Jones. And there is some
Mhm.
talk of him possibly being brought back. I heard Joe Rogan might be pushing Dana White to try and get John Jones back in the ring for that one.
It would be super cool. It's My money's still on John Jones, but if the odds go again 3-1, I'm taking for
Yeah.
because fighting is unpredictable. Pereira's also a freak of nature who I don't care who you are. There's a statistical chance he's going to knock you out, and it's a high statistical chance.
He's an animal.
He's just a freak of nature, and I never respected his technique. I always just attributed it to immense nuclear power, like being a freak, genetic.
Okay.
And so I'd watch his instructional, and I'm like, this guy's keeping his chin up, his hands are low, he's not really cutting the angles, like everything I'm against in training, which is so if like the guy's a world champion, he's the best fighter ever, right? And I'm sitting here like criticizing him. It's dumb. I know it sounds dumb, but objectively speaking, had I not known any of this and I just looked at him, I'd say, how is he pulling off all these wins? And then I've been watching him more, and I'm like, no, he's actually is an incredible striker. He can keep you right at the end of your punch, and he can counter over top. He trusts his power. Like he's who he is. I would never recommend. Let's say someone came to learn self-defense for me, and they're like, "I love Alex Pereira. I want to model myself after him as a fighter, as a self-defense approach." You're
Hmm.
a lunatic if you think you're going to fight like Alex Pereira and survive in a street fight. But
Yes.
Alex Pereira can fight like Alex Pereira. Like there are some styles of fighting that are clean aesthetically and technically and are conducive to teaching other people how to defend themselves. And then there's some styles of fighting that just work for the fighter that don't necessarily have to be aesthetically clean, don't necessarily have to follow proper technique, but they just have a gift and they're able to take advantage of it. And that style is a result of their gift. Alex Pereira is very much in that category. You look at Mike Tyson, you look at peekaboo boxing. If someone told me I want to learn a style of boxing that's very good for self-defense, I think peekaboo boxing is a very good self-defense system. You're tight, you're covered, you're hiding behind your shoulders, you're zigzagging, you're closing the gap to get past the end of their punch. It's an inherently shorter person, smaller person system, which is where Mike Tyson excelled. There's certain things in favor of that style. You're cutting angles to the side all the time. Head movement is constant, so you're a hard target, and you rely on power, which in the street is a very, very effective way to. You want people scared of you. If someone's actually attacking you, and you go boom, 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 and you're right in their face. You're cracking them with a hook, an uppercut, cutting out to the side, whipping, bam, and you're catching. That's going to be a hard thing for any normal person to deal with, and you're tight the whole time. So it's just statistically a safer self-defense boxing system. But again, there's guys who fight like this with their hands down and the chin up, and they just put you over the top and knock you out. And
well, even Sean Strickland comes to mind, where he does the Philly shell, which usually in MMA is it's less utilized due to the exposure you put yourself at for head kicks, right? But it works for him, no problem. You see,
he's just like I've really gained respect for him. He's another one I thought I just was like, there's no way he's ever beating Israel Adesanya. I was like, what is this fight? Like, if you gave me $1 million to bet, I would have never bet on Strickland. He did train with Pereira, which might have helped him. What I will say inherently you would think Philly shell. I'm a huge advocate of self-defense. I always say that your first reaction, if your hands are down, if we were sitting here talking and something happened, my first reaction, if you just swung at me quick, would not be to lift my hands. This is a long motion, right? There's a lot of distance for my hand to cover from my waist to my face. There's not a lot of distance for my shoulder to come up and protect my chin. This is much faster than this, right? And so Philly shelling is an inherent quick reaction. After this, my hands can come up. But if this is not my first reaction, this protects me. If you have a knife, you're going to cut my shoulder, not my carotid artery. I just did a knife video, very tragic. But that reaction would have saved his life. Very hard, obviously, against a knife. But at least you would have been sliced your arm open and not your carotid artery. Same for fighting, right? If someone just surprise attacks me and I do this, I'm shelled up. So Philly shell works very well at protecting a point on your body, which is your neck and your jaw, from getting hit. It's not as utilized, I think, because you're wearing MMA gloves, not big gloves. If you think of a Philly shell in boxing, you have a massive glove, you're not getting touched anywhere because it's just bouncing off your shoulder. With MMA, you can still get caught right in the orbital and get caught in the temple and get KO'd. But the way Strickland does it is he manages distance. I think that's his real skill. It's not just the Philly shell because he also uses a long guard. He manages distance very, very well. He knows how to keep you on the end of his punch, similar to what I was saying about Pereira.
Yes.
He keeps you on the end of his punch. And then he knows how to get in your face and pressure you and just kind of walk you down so that you don't have range to keep catching him. And then when you get range, he just kind of shells up, leans back just enough to be out of range, and then just comes right back in. He's a weird one to me because I have to respect him. But Pereira is obviously, again, leagues. You take Strickland and Pereira. Pereira is like an advanced nuclear version of Strickland.
I see that.
You saw it when they fought each other. Like Strickland and him were playing a very similar game, and he just got killed very quickly. So
something else I've seen you talk about that I thought was really cool is you like, and it probably comes from being a BJJ black belt as well as practicing FMA. But when you talk about this perception that generally occurs where people are dismissive of traditional things until they see it in the ring, and then all of a sudden everybody references this traditional martial art. And I just think it's really cool that you make the observation that it must be applicable and effective before it happens in the ring for it to happen in the ring at all.
Yeah, it's a big pet peeve of mine, but that's with any trend.
Yes.
So I like obscure things just inherently, right? Like if I'm going to collect something, I collect like weird antiques, I collect sideshow collectible type stuff. I like weird things, and so when something becomes mainstream, it just loses a little bit of its appeal to me. Um, Even with the guns I own, right?
Mhm.
I own less popular firearms, as crazy as that sounds. I just think, I like things that other people don't have. And so my approach to martial arts is very similar. And I always find it so like I'll go train with like these random teachers, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting, that's interesting. And I'll try it in sparring and pull it off. Even my jujitsu style, uh, I was very early on doing heel hooks, and I was training Sambo very early on before it was popular, before anyone else was doing it, and wrist locks well before they became popular. Now I was doing wrist locks. Like I thought Aikido had tremendous value for BJJ, just from a
Right.
wrist lock standpoint, being effective at wrist locking people.
Mhm.
Um, Obviously, I'm not a huge fan of Aikido for self defense in itself, but supplementally, it's a cool thing. There's some things there. And then people will ignore or put down everything I'm saying. And then the second it becomes mainstream and popular, they're like the biggest fans of it. And I'm like, this is the dumbest thing. I literally had a conversation with you like 5 years ago when no one was talking about this and you were trashing me for it. And now all of a sudden, because someone did it in the ring and Joe Rogan's talking about it, it's the coolest move ever, and you're implementing it into your game. I'm like, all right, I don't really care. And I don't train martial arts for ego. I really don't. There's anyone could beat me in a fight. I accepted that a long time ago. I train out of passion. So if it works for me, I do it. I don't really care if people like the move or don't like the move. I
Yeah.
share it with the world. And if you want to try it, try it. And if you don't. Um, and even when people like want to test me, and I'm a huge fan of that in a weird way, even though I said it's not ego driven. I actually like testing myself against other people, win or lose. I don't actually care. I like fighting. So I'm in a position to constantly test things. I'm lucky in that sense that that's just my nature, that I grew up that way. I grew up very, I needed, if I couldn't have martial arts and specifically martial arts that I could fight, like Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, where I'm sparring, Muay Thai, things like Kyokushin, Filipino martial arts, the way I learned them, we did full contact stick fighting. If I didn't get that out of me, I would have been a crazy kid, like a crazy person.
Yeah, it's your
Uh,
vector, right?
it 100% uh, is something I need to do. Yeah, there's something mentally with me that it's the thing that kind of centers me, and not again, not in an aggressive way, ego driven way. Um, because I'm just as happy when I lose in a sparring match or whatever it is. I don't go fight competitively. But as long as I'm learning, as long as I'm in there, injuries are part of the game. I accepted that a long time ago. I have crazy injuries.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Right on. We're running low on time, so I think we'll wrap it up there. But thank you very much for being here, man.
Thanks, man.